Okay, if I could have everyone's attention. Dr. Brian Coppola is Arthur F. Thernau Professor of Chemistry at the University of Michigan. He currently serves as the department's Associate Chair for Educational Development and Practice, and also as the Associate Director for the University of Michigan Peking University Joint Institute in Beijing, China. Dr. Coppola received his BS degree in 1978 from the University of New Hampshire and his PhD in organic chemistry from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 1984. His publications range from mechanistic organic chemistry research to educational philosophy, practice, and assessment. In 2012, he was appointed as the first Associate Chair for Educational Development and Practice. In this capacity, he is primarily responsible for directing the department's future faculty program, in which undergraduate students, graduate students, and postdoctoral associates work with faculty members on teaching and learning projects within the department's curriculum. Since 1994, he has received numerous teaching awards, including the 2012-14 Robert Foster Cherry Award for Great Teaching. He is a member of several editorial boards, including the Chemical Educator and the Journal of Science, Education, and Technology. These accolades and accomplishments are impressive indeed, but simply put, he is our keynote speaker because he embodies two core aims of the Center for Academic Innovation: transcending our disciplinary silos and integrating teaching and learning. For example, on his website, he explains an important aspect of his life's work. Discipline-centered teaching and learning is the interdisciplinary area in which all faculty members participate, regardless of their preparation for it. He notes that discipline-centered teaching and learning is a synthesis of two things: a deep understanding of the subject matter and an application of the principles of teaching and learning that are derived from the learning sciences. On a personal note, this is the first time I have taken the lead in organizing this type of campus event, and working with now Brian, I can call him that. Working with Brian over the past few months has really been a pleasure. He is the consummate colleague and professional, and I am very proud on behalf of CHI to welcome him as our keynote speaker for the inaugural CHI Symposium. Dr. Coppola.
Thank you so much for that generous introduction. Thank you in general for the invitation here. It's always exciting to be part of an inaugural anything. So although it does not have its physical space yet, I will hereby swing the virtual champagne bottle against the bow of your virtual center and wish it all the best, and especially for the work of the faculty, which is the most important thing. So I'm going to start today with something that I will ultimately express as a sense of irony by calling them heretical ideas. So I'm going to stay secular in this. And the idea of a heresy as a provocative opinion that is strongly at variance with whatever some established dogma might be. And I say ironically because I'm going to argue briefly. This is the Debbie Downer part of the talk, by the way. I'm going to argue briefly that higher education is not in the place where it might be, and that some of the things that we are currently seeing as dogmatic, in fact, need to be changed. And so if I'm holding a provocative opinion against the prevailing dogma, then I am being heretical. So I share with you my heresies. 4 of them, in fact. So the first one, education is a social science. Why is this a heresy? Because there's a lot of stuff rolling around higher education treating it as a physical science, as a thing that can be quantified and measured. Among the phrases that give me the greatest delight is the phrase evidence-based results. I don't think that there's enough information out there to make that claim for 3 reasons. The first one is, for sure, in the way that it's currently used. It does not acknowledge that every context is different. Every school, every classroom, every collection of students. The myth of the magic bullet lives in higher education and is buried under the banner of evidence-based results. Because people would have you believe, see, we figured it out. Just do this, and all will be good. The discipline really matters, as Bob alluded to in the things that I stand for. And your expertise and your training, your understanding of what you know is intimately tied to your own training and your own experience. And when you walk into the classroom, believe it or not, you are there for more than just the subject matter and the content. You are there for how an individual relates to the discipline, understands the discipline in terms of its practices. And if you are a disciplinary expert, it isn't just that you are an encyclopedia of stuff. You are a person who understands where the facts come from. You understand the experiments, the process, whatever the intellectual process is. Evidence-based results are being sold to you as an idea that this process can be reduced to a series of tricks, procedures, information only, that relate to something that is so immune to just information, and that is teaching and learning. Second point. Teaching and learning are behaviors. They aren't things that can be reduced to simple numerical outcomes. You know, facts alone are never enough to change behavior. If that were true, there would be no overweight, sedentary, smoking physicians. Facts alone are not enough. You can now mine that idea for almost anything. If facts alone are enough, AIDS would have been eradicated in half a generation. Facts alone are not enough. Behaviors are complex things. It doesn't argue against information. Information is the start, not the end of change. The projections are, look, I grew up in the era of the Surgeon General's warnings, and I took those pretty seriously. And except for the secondhand smoke I got from my parents, I have never smoked. But we still project that it's 2050, 2060 before smoking in the US dips below into single digits. These are complex behaviors that don't take place, change, just because somebody goes, don't do that. And not just because we know it's bad. We know it's bad. Third, then, this model of education in the evidence-based results arena, treating the notion of teaching and learning as a physical science, is flawed by a kind of educational reductionism that says education is really just the moving of the marbles around. Here's some facts, I go to class, I test it, I pick it up later. The hallmark of educational reductionism is standards and standards-based testing. Because the evidence in nearly every single one of those papers where they're peddling the evidence-based methods for you, the evidence, look at it. It's how well a person does on a multiple choice exam. I don't accept that as evidence of learning. I want to hear more than that. And even though some of our friends have tried to coax us by calling these multiple choice examinations concept inventories, they are in fact lists of multiple choice questions on factoids that claim, in the case of the forced concept inventory, the most beloved of these things, I look at my physicists calling, that you can get a lot of information in 30 different conceptual areas with 25 questions or whatever it is. Sure, I'll sell you a bridge. It's all sort of sales, and you have to be critical about it as you are anything else. At the very least, look at the evidence, see what it says to you. Education is a social science. It is a complex activity that requires more than just the things. Students have agency in their learning. You know, you can have, so let's just accept evidence-based learning for a moment. You can have all the evidence-based learning you want. But the choice to buy the Frappuccino does not sit with the barista. The choice is still in the hands of the student. You can create the best learning environment that you possibly can, and it will be rejected. There's an old principle that has been ignored, really ignored, that goes back, and it goes back forever, but Dewey wrote about it, and there was a really strong emergence in the early 60s about it, that to remember that when you're designing situations for teaching and learning, you have to design into the idea automatically that students have agency, and that just because you build it, they will not come. And you have to think about how that's engineered too. Third, methods used badly are not bad methods. This is borrowed from a really, really hot young scholar named David Feldman at the University of Virginia, who, when I'm paraphrasing him a little bit, always says, don't confuse the bad use of a method with the use of a bad method. This is really critical. This is really critical to understand for all the people that you have heard bash being in a classroom in a face-to-face setting, the lecture method. It is true that sitting children in the dark and reading PowerPoint slides to them is a bad idea. But that is not an indictment of the face-to-face option. It's just a bad idea. I have been interviewed many times about my recommendations of what I think would improve higher education. And I repeat again, you can improve higher education overnight by making PowerPoint and multiple choice exams illegal. Elect me. We, not us. We, the capital W, we in the profession, I think have lost collectively the art of the ad hoc, improvised, persuasive, oral presentation by relying far too much on these tools and crutches. It isn't the notes. You don't pay money to go see Yo-Yo Ma walk onto stage with sheets of music. Isn't that beautiful? You pay for Yo-Yo Ma's interpretation and understanding of the notes. And what you can't see there, you pay for the expertise of the interpretation and performance of the notes. Want to teach like me? If what you do is ask to see my notes, you are digging in the wrong place. You're welcome to my notes. It's playing the notes that really matters. Believe me, if I were given the notes that Yo-Yo Ma has, you wouldn't pay anything. Competency. Another word I don't like. So I told you this is heresy. Competency is not the same as an education. Period. End of story. Competency sets a bar. Competency does all kinds of stuff, but it's really interested in a binary decision. And the binary decision is right or wrong. It is not indicative of an education. In an education, an educated person learns from failure. In the realm of competency, incompetence means you are fired. In an education, we embrace ambiguity. We reconcile it, and when we can't reconcile it, we simply come to the most defensible position we can today and hope that there's more information tomorrow. In a competence-based system, we only deal in the things that have been decided as right and wrong. In an education, we seek out uncertainty. If it is known, you do not get any grant money for it. We seek out uncertainty and we explore it. Competence means sticking with the known. Uncertainty means ask the boss what to do. There is a good reason that the online methods have embraced the rhetoric of competency. And that's because they've mistaken an education as the accumulation of a fixed corpus. Because when things are a fixed corpus, you can create standards-based and fact-based examinations. We've tried this many times. Possibly the most noteworthy one in the modern era for competency-based education was about 100 years ago when the Postal Service became reliable. Because the first of the competency-based education systems in the modern era is the same one that exists today. In my generation, they advertised on the back of matchbook covers. They are called correspondence courses. And every time a new technology has come in, the Postal Service, radio, television, the internet, everybody goes buzzy about how that's going to transform education. What it does is transform the correspondence system. There will always be a place for face-to-face. So this notion of education then begs a question, of course, in terms of what do we consider to be an education? How are we collectively going to defend against it? And I turn for inspiration here to, as I said this morning, this review in educational psychology from 2012, which I have cited so many times I could probably recite the whole thing. But I think everything I've published in the last 2 years includes this. Slavich and Zimbardo took a 40-year meta-retrospective on teaching innovations and dared in all the best ways possible, dared to come up with a model for what they call transformational teaching. And it's complex and so forth. So I draw your attention to these 3 bullet points, which are the center layer in their model. And I do that because I just love them. Slavich and Zimbardo would argue, actually they don't argue it explicitly, but I think they are arguing it implicitly. I see it there, so it's existing. Slavich and Zimbardo would argue, I think implicitly, that you cannot claim to have educated, nor can you claim to be an educated person, unless you have mastered concepts. Well, that seems like a gimme. But they go ahead and define this idea. It isn't the gathering of the nuggets. Mastery of concept to them really is an act of transfer. That you have taken the general ideas that you have learned and you have made meaning of new and unfamiliar information. To have made meaning from new and unfamiliar information, the application of concepts, the transfer of your knowledge, they would argue, is that bullet. You have to demonstrate that. You have to do that. Second, self-evident in terms of the words, that you've got increased learning how to learn. Let me skip to the upshot of this, which is, this is an argument against learning styles. We want people to come out with different skills. We want people to be moved outside of their comfort zones into their zone of proximal development. We want them, through us, to use our understanding of the subject matter in our discipline as a vehicle for giving them different experiences. But more than that, I'm going to now pray at the Church of Slavic and Zimbardo and say, you are not an educated person unless you have increased your learning how to learn. And you cannot claim to have educated someone unless you can say you have moved them to this. Now those two are awesome, but I'm telling you right now, the third one's the best. It's a phrase that I have embraced, and I just ought to make t-shirts from. You have not educated someone unless you can demonstrate positive learning-related attitudes, values, and beliefs. Now, it's a tough one because what the hell does that mean? In the case of Slavic and Zimbardo, they're both educational psychologists, so they mean things that are of value to them. Things like motivation, self-efficacy. But I see it as more than that. This is the stuff that isn't on the syllabus. I give you an example that I think stretches across all disciplines. Because all disciplines that think critically about themselves, okay, that's all of them. All disciplines that think critically about themselves are interested in skepticism. How we react to things that we see for the first time and deciding whether or not we want to believe them. And I will bet, and I have never lost this bet, I will bet that not a single one of you on your syllabus says Day 12 Skepticism. And the reason is your expertise in the discipline. The notion of how you interact with the subject matter of your discipline, the facts and the theories, is all guided by your disciplinary skepticism. You cannot open your mouth and talk about your subject without carrying all of the so-called disciplinary dispositions, where the data come from, how people react to it, what the arguments are, and so forth. This is the reason at the university that we embrace the idea that our best disciplinary scholars are, in fact, our best educators. Because they carry with them the deepest understanding of the discipline. And it's not the factoids that are important. It's all this other stuff. The stuff that isn't written down, the stuff that's in between the lines, the things like skepticism. There are other things. If you want to look for inspiration, there's a fellow named George Kamen who wrote this editorial in the Washington Post a couple of years ago who said, you know, in science education, I would be very happy if the only thing students had when they left university was A, comfort with uncertainty, B, tolerance for ambiguity, and C, learning from failure. I would be very happy if this was the outcome from the education. The disciplinary dispositions are really contained in this. And you can take skepticism, my example. You can take other things, learning how to write and speak clearly and economically. I'm guessing that isn't on your syllabus either, but it's there every day. It's embedded in assignments. What it really speaks to, and Slavic and Zimbardo don't come near this, Kamen doesn't come near this, but I come near this. I think what we're talking about here are very traditional ideals of the liberal arts goals. This is the stuff that's written between the lines. This is the stuff for which our disciplinary content is a vehicle. And our understanding of it is the mode of delivery. If I bridge this part of it to the remarks that actually relate to the title that I used, having to do with real work, we have over the years been designing principles for creating learning environments, and particularly for creating assignments, that we call real work design principles. And there's a chapter that just came out, which for the first time sort of puts this all in one place, and you can get this reference from me or write it down. If you've got a good library connection, you can download the entire thing for free from the Wiley site. And I'm not going to go through all of these. Some of them are self-explanatory, some aren't, and I don't want to take the time to sort of run through a dissertation of this, but I want to leave them up there for a minute to have you look at them. The notion of the real work is really embedded in the idea that the work that students do ought to be authentic. It ought to have some degree of meaning outside of the assignment itself. there are lots of ways that people have designed, thought about the notion of authentic learning. Relevance, quote unquote relevance. Relevance doesn't, we were talking about this earlier, relevance doesn't have to be socially relevant. Relevant needs to be personally meaningful. For whatever meaning that might be. Ill-defined problems, sustained investigations, blah, 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 blah. What matters in the notion of real work is really embedded in the title. The work itself is real. It's not just done for the purpose of assignment. It has some life or existence. So if I take the sort of the ultimate version of a real work assignment, it might be something like undergraduate research, which I know that your center has embraced as a mission. It really matters. It is stuff that people haven't done. And you get involved in the entire process of the sort of early professionalization of people when you get involved in undergraduate research. And one of the questions then becomes, how can you carry out real work with undergraduates in classes? You can't necessarily embed research activities in every class there is, and that's not terribly meaningful, but you can start to ramp up to it and think about what are the pieces that you can capture. And I don't want to make any kind of claim whatsoever that I am inventing this or that it hasn't been done. I am envious of, for example, writing classes. As long as you got a good audience in mind, writing is always real work. Terrific engineering classes where students have to build a thing to accomplish a thing and have it happen. Your own connectedness with service-related activities. I give you one brief example. There's a school in Hong Kong, one of the universities in Hong Kong, City University of Hong Kong, has embraced a notion of a discovery-enriched curriculum. And it's trying to send 100% of its students out during the course of their undergraduate education to be able to say, I have made some kind of discovery. 100% of the students. And the early classes begin to get students accustomed to this. And they are sending the students out into the community. They're like a CUNY school. They're right in the city. They're sending people right out into the community. And so one group of students last year, it was part of an engineering class, was standing at a bus stop and saw, in fact, that a bunch of blind people couldn't get information about what the bus schedule was that other people were getting access to because it was flashing up on the signs ahead of them. Ah, there's a problem that needs to be solved. And about 4 months later, they built a widget that could go associated with the cane where this person could get the information from the bus stop where they're at, because it turned out it was being broadcast and translated into a form that could be interpreted. They've set themselves up with the goal that 100% of their students over the course of their undergraduate education is going to be involved in some kind of discovery, and thought about how does the curriculum have to change to lead up to this? How do we bed principles of authentic instruction all the way along? So the story I want to tell you, first of all, I could give you lots of examples that involve graduate students, but you are not a graduate institution. So everything I say from here on out only involves undergraduates. At the University of Michigan, I teach organic chemistry. Organic chemistry at the University of Michigan in the fall term has 4 fairly large sections. We have 1,600 students taking organic chemistry in the fall. And I know that among those 1,600 students, there are students who are interested in science. They came to the university fairly motivated by it, and right now they are diluted in that crowd. So to try to concentrate them, we have offered for now 20 years an honors option for introductory organic chemistry, which we call a studio option, structured study groups, for the science motivated. We're using supplemental instruction rather than a separate section of the course. And that means we put out a call at the beginning of the semester. Anybody who is feeling particularly geeky, nerdy, excited about science and wants to get to know one another and do this really interesting stuff, come to an information session and sign up. And what you're going to agree to do is meet for an extra 2 hours a week in groups of about 20 under the supervision of an undergraduate, junior, or senior who did well in this business before, who is in turn my extended teaching team. In that sense, I just told you all my secrets. If I want to think about doing interesting instruction, I solve the problem, not by doing it myself. I solve the problem the same way I solve the problem of how to do big research. I get a team of people for whom it becomes an educational activity. So now, every fall for 20 years, about 160 students will elect to take this option. They're still enrolled in the big class and have the books and the exams and so forth. But for 2 hours a week, they meet in groups of 20, led by these 8 undergraduate juniors and seniors whose pictures from the last couple are down at the bottom of this slide. I want to interpret this very clearly for you. Honors organic chemistry at the University of Michigan is taught by undergraduates. 2 other undergraduates under my supervision, and has been for 20 years. So, real world. I'm sorry to show chemistry. I apologize now. Close your eyes. Close your eyes and take the general meaning from what I'm about to say. Because I really want to describe this first week. Students who have been at university for 7 or 8 days. This is the thing they have to do for their assignment. Find the library. Go to the library. Actually, do send them to the real library. And we actually make them touch journals made of paper. And go to the library and find a journal. Now, you've been in college for a week. Go to the library, find a journal, and find a molecule that meets these criteria. The criteria just have to do with counting atoms. Here's a broad atom count. You go to this year, this journal. You go to this year, this journal. 160 students, 160 journals, 160 different molecules. I'm taking advantage of the fact that there's 200,000 pages worth of journals published in organic chemistry alone every year. Now, I want you to go find a molecule that meets this criterion, and you can work with other people because you have a journal that's different from somebody else. Wait a minute, I have the students going into the journals right away. And I don't have them reading because they don't know what those words are. But I do have them looking at the pictures, finding representative molecules that fit this category. And then I say, find a molecule that fits the category, learn how to cite it, and what I want you to do is take that set of atoms and invent 5 rational molecules. Now let me tell you, with this number of atoms, the number of irrational molecules you could construct is enormous. So the task of constructing 5 rational molecules out of that set is really a lot of work and actually pretty relevant to the class. I show you here student work for people who've been in college a week, just trying to solve this problem. It's okay to chat with other people because somebody else has a completely different set of atoms than you do. And now, during the first part of the class, we are correlating structure in obscenely simple molecules. Correlating structure to properties like boiling point, melting point, solubility, dipole moment. I mean, obscenely simple molecules. And so we task them and say, now that you've created these 5 new structures, see whether or not you can rank them according to those principles. Now let me share with you something that all the chemists in the audience know already. This is an impossible problem. This is a problem for which there is no answer. This is a problem for which there was an answer. You could be a multimillionaire in any given chemical industry. I am asking them to take a set of simple principles and apply them to a complex problem. And not come up with the answer, because there is no way to get the answer. There is no answer. We really start to use phrases like, there is no answer, and it bugs the crap out of them. Because they've grown up thinking that science is the last place where they might actually find truth. And instead what we say is, the best you're going to come up with is the most defensible answer. And we start to use that language right away. That's what they do at home. Then next week in the 2-hour period, 3/4 of the time is spent with them in a peer-reviewed discussion process, as other people try to decide how good was the defensibility of their answer. Because everybody else has been doing the same task, conceptually, but on a different set of molecules. And so all of a sudden, of course, they're looking at the decisions made by other people around that same task, and I'm telling you, they ask questions like, uh-oh, is mine right? Is theirs right? Are we both right? Are we both wrong? And there's this really noisy 1.5-hour process that takes place as we go through 2 rounds of this review process. They are not grading one another's papers. They are using one another's examples as the basis of discussion. Too often in science classes, the answer is the end of a discussion. We have turned answers into the beginning of a discussion. At the end of that 1.5-hour period, as they've gone through 2 cycles of this, they then get back their original paper, unmarked, along with a charge. And the charge is there anything you now want to change? All I've done is gone through the kind of peer review and editing process that they do in any composition class. Take your rough draft, share it with people, get feedback, and decide whether there's something you want to change. 100% of the time the answer is yes. 100% of the time their argument has improved. Week after week after week. Week 3, go to a journal, find an example, turn it into a potential quiz problem. Then you come in, vet the problem, change it around, and use it as a quiz internally. I'm going to say in both these cases, I'm trying to say here are some aspects of real work. You're using, I'm going to go back a few slides and say, I've got teamwork and individual work. I've got authentic texts that I'm drawing on. The notion of a divergent assignment is I'm giving everybody the same thing, but they're all doing something different. There isn't an answer. There's not a convergence, and so forth. So here's another one. So we give our examinations on that scale are still done open-ended in order to try to get us unlocked from thinking in small circles, in order to transmit to students the idea that just becoming familiar with the textbook is not enough. We base 100% of our problems on the current literature. As an organic chemist, I have that advantage, because all I have to do is read the pictures. And every year, we have to switch up a kind of set of sample problems that they have to work from, because we don't want to provide an answer key. Because it's really important not to have that, and that's a talk for another day. So it means we end up with a whole bunch of interesting retired problems that we can do nothing with. So we've turned this into a resource involving student-generated instructional materials. That's the point here. We now have students working among these 160s, they're working in teams of 3, and we charge them with picking some old problem out of a big repertoire that we have, and pretend that you are sitting down and tutoring a peer on the solution to that problem. It's my concession to an answer key for this set of problems. Take a 3 to 5 minute time period and think about tutoring a person through that. What are the decisions that have to be made? And over about a month-long period, you have to put drafts of that script, drafts of the images, so forth and so on. And at the end of it, we end up producing these visually enhanced podcasts. Now that group of 160 is actually making a learning resource on the scale of about 100 per term, 80 per term, that then becomes available to the class as a whole the next year. If it were up to me to create these, you'd get about one every other year. I got about 500 of these over a 6-year period. So, students, written by students, for students, every word, every image change.
Hi, and welcome to ChemBC News. I am London Vanderwalls, and here's my co-anchor, Jenny Neutron.
Thank you, London. Today we are going to explain the mechanism for this electrophilic addition reaction found on page 161 of the course pack.
The iodine and alkene in this reaction are in an aqueous, watery solution. As the iodine approaches the double bond,
I just want to illustrate, it's clearly students talking to students. They've taken this kind of funny approach of a news broadcast. It's fine, I think it's cool.
Cabin 250.
If you have sensitive ears, you may want to close them.
I don't know, dude. I feel like everybody's all jealous and shit, because I like mastered the PKAs, dude. And I think everyone's got a fucking problem with me, dude, and they need to take it up with me after the test. Because the pKa values in DMSO for molecules ABC given below. This question's testing you to see if you know the reasons for the pKa's that they show.
Okay, you get it. So I think that's pretty cool. I got a whole bunch of these things, and it's okay for them to be creative in that sense. If the science is okay, I'm okay with that. And this becomes then a resource that's available to the class as a whole. How's my time? Am I over? Am I over? Damn it, hell. I have about 2 minutes? Really? Okay. Another example of student-generated instructional materials. My colleague Ann McNeil and I both, in fact, the organic division at the University of Michigan doesn't care that much for e-homework systems. I personally think that systems that keep students from interacting with other students are evil. On the other hand, I do like the platform. I do like the mercilessness of a computer. And it turned out that we had a set of topics that we really thought students should have 100% mastery of. So out of the whole range of topics in organic chemistry, there's a subset we really thought they ought to have 100% mastery of. And we thought that the vehicle of one of these e-homework systems would be good. That was the good news. The bad news is that we needed about 100 problems apiece in 10 specific areas that really matched our own goals. Now, you have probably figured out by now how I solved that problem. And I didn't solve it by writing 1,000 problems. I turned it into a student activity. And so in the fall of 2013, Sapling Learning was really great, and it turned out the back end of their system was accessible. We trained 170 first-term, first-year students how to be authors in this e-homework system. And they let us do it. It's remarkable. And the first time, and we were very conservative. We had the 170 students generated about 200 problems. And we were using the Sapling professional staff as our final arbiters of goodness. So we put in peer review and critique locally, but we really said to the Sapling people, we want you to tell us how many of these problems are publication ready, that you would put out into your system. In the first term that we did this, out of those 200 problems, there were about 30 that were publication ready. There was another 60 that needed a little bit of editing. And you know, it's a freaking pain in the ass to edit these problems because you're not just editing the problem. You have now created 20 to 30 answers anticipating what the wrong answers are and the feedback that you want to give. Writing problems is easy in these systems, but there aren't any AIs running these things. You are imagining 20 to 30 different wrong scenarios and the feedback that you want to give. So if there is one little error on there, you learn about propagation of error pretty quickly. But we learned a lot about how to improve our system. And so the next semester we went in, we selected about 31 of those students to generate 2 problems apiece through the new vetted system. And over the course of that semester, 2 problems apiece times 30 students times 12 weeks, whatever that number is, it roughly is around 700, 800 problems. 97% of them were publication ready. And in last fall, then, we opened that up then as a resource for the class as a whole. The number of problems I have written in the Sapling system is a round number. Really, it's a round number. But training these students how to do that, and of course getting students to think about, here's a problem, and here are the possible incorrect answers and why they're incorrect is a fairly interesting instructional activity. And of course they take pride and ownership and all this kind of stuff. And once again, this kind of group of 8 leaders with small groups and so forth is how it's done. How much did this cost? I know you're thinking that. How much did this cost? Almost nothing. Not nothing. Almost nothing. Undergraduates are cheap, of course. You can often buy them for credit. And in fact, we created an independent study class of teaching, learning, chemistry or something, whatever. And the process of creating problems and vetting them and reviewing them and so forth, the intellectual activity they got a credit for. Then there was a little pocket of money somewhere, and so for the mechanical work of translating those into the system, we paid them $250, not a piece. Not a piece per problem. We paid $250 to an individual for a semester's work of that kind of entering. It wasn't that much money really to get that kind of work out of it. And Sapling was wonderful. We retained the copyright on this. If any other school wants to use these problems, Sapling is happy to intervene and license those problems to them, and we can give them away or whatever. But it's an example of student-generated work using the sort of interesting power of undergraduates. This example takes too long. I want to end with saying how to get to the thing that matters, which is already what I'm alluding to. How do I support this work? I'm really doing this in the same way that we do research. You know, for those of you who aren't in science, I want you to understand that in the mid-20th century, scientists figured out the best scam you ever imagined. We trade work for an education. It's called a research group. For those of you who have never been part of a research group, let me tell you who the leader of how can you tell who the leader of a scientific research group, 5, 6, 7, 8 is? That's the person who does no experiments. That person manages and directs the work of the intergenerational team. Since 1950, big ideas get implemented through this really interesting intergenerational structure where postdocs, graduate students, and undergrads are all working on an appropriate piece of the action. We have learned how to share our research with our students. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, the only interesting question I've ever asked in my entire life, I think, was, is that same framework possible to use for teaching? Can I think about teaming up with postdocs, grad students, undergrads? Which ones? The ones who are interested in becoming professors. There's a subset of people who doesn't want to just to learn chemistry, but wants to learn how to teach chemistry. And to provide for them the kind of infrastructure and support through the course of their entire education, not to wait till they come onto campus and make up the difference for 12 years of neglect. The way I see it. And after 20 years of working the pieces of this out, I'm proud to say that I am in a Department of Chemistry. And now I'm giving you N equals 1 across the board. One department, one university. I'm not talking about something that is across the University of Michigan or across any place else. But we are a Department of Chemistry that has placed, as of fall 2014, a hard-line budgeted program for future faculty development and instructional development into our department. And in order to commit to that, created a new associate chair position, that would be me, to institutionalize this and to see to the care and feeding. It means that we now have a minimum of a steady state of 8 postdoctoral positions in the department that are combined research and teaching. Not the old horrible teaching postdoc model of, here's a book, good luck, see you later. But in fact, those people have to be admitted into our research groups first, and then they have the opportunity to have one teaching assignment in a mentored way, because all of our multi-section courses are pretty highly mentored over one a year during their 2-year period. Future faculty GSI or TA positions, where previously all TA positions had 2 hours a week babysitting lab and supervising labs. And now we have a handful of those positions that are 10 hours a week of doing that supervision and another 10 hours a week of doing educational, instructional development work and educational research. Built into the fabric of the department. What work do they work on? Well, this is a mechanism by which my colleagues move forward their ideas about our undergraduate program. Every professor I know of in my department has ideas about their course and how to improve it. What they don't have is the time. And the time now we're getting for them is the time of labor. The time of trading the work for an education for the part of these people. We also have other opportunities for the graduate students. And undergraduates, as I say, are cheap. When you're building a research group, bringing in the undergraduates, providing credit, a little bit of money goes a long way. Sticking with undergraduates, here are some of the beta test subjects in this program. PJ Alamo's been a faculty member at Seattle University, Sarah at Williams, Suzanne at Irvine, and Alice, I can hardly see them, Allison, Curie, and Costas, who are all ending their postdocs at the same time and are all out looking for academic positions now. All people who, as undergraduates at least, were part of the kind of teaching arrangement that I was talking about. And even if that was never reinforced during their graduate program, they would all stand up here, put their hand on my computer and testify that that had a very critical component in terms of the way they think about teaching and learning. And it means that people like Anne McNeil, my world-class polymer sciences colleague, who at her website will tell you, our research focuses on this, and I'm also active in educational innovations. This is not something that's bad in our department anymore. It's a good thing. As an assistant professor, Anne wanted to get involved in this stuff and could. She wanted to integrate Wikipedia editing into graduate courses, and that meant a lot of work that Anne was not going to do as assistant professor. Creating instructional materials, interfacing, blah, 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 all the stuff on that list. So instead, Anne worked with 2 of her own graduate students, developed this. It is now a part of every graduate course in our department. She went up for tenure with a paper in the Journal of Chemical Education, a citation in science for this, and an invitation out to Wiki headquarters in order to feel good about it. Mark Banaszak Hall in the upper left there always had a dream of studio instruction in general chemistry, a one-room schoolhouse approach for integrated lab and lecture discussion. And he'd still be dreaming about it today, except we had this structure in place that allowed him to put a team of people together from education, from stats, postdocs, grad students, and undergraduate students, and turn this into a 5-year project on which they did research. Mark is a world-class scholar in biophysical chemistry and inorganic materials chemistry, but also will list at his website this area of educational development as what he does, because we have a mechanism to support it. So, Cesium, Chemical Sciences at the Interface of Education at the University of Michigan, we pronounce Cesium, is the program for future faculty development that has allowed us to integrate real work activity that broadens the scope of students' education, not only from research, but research and education for that subset of people thinking about becoming faculty. I thank my colleagues, the honors program, all kinds of people who have given money and inspiration over the years. I thank you for your patience and this invitation. Up to you, you're the clock keepers.
Okay. If you want to ask any quick questions, we have about 5 minutes for that, and then from 4 to 5 we will have a closing reception here, and you'll have more time to ask questions and interact with Brian at that time. We do have follow-up showcase sessions. The program is in the booklet. So we'll wait about 5 minutes if you have any questions for Brian.
Man.
I love the beginning in terms of the heretical ideas. I felt like that spoke to me so enormously. So I have a sense that you don't really care all that much that people think you are this heretic. But in an academic environment, what sort of special shielding have you taken on when you start saying the things that you say?
You know, there's a certain status you get once you're a senior faculty member. You just don't say anything. What can they do to you? But it is, so there is, I think you can tell already. I mean, you're absolutely right. I do this with purpose, right? I sometimes call it just throwing a grenade into the room. Just to sort of liven people up and get them talking about something. I'm going to take a position. Now, I am more than willing to change my mind. I'm really willing to change my mind. But I'd really like to go eye to eye with you in that conversation. So I'm sort of taking a position and saying, I'm willing to change my mind, but I really want to hear us talk about that. And if you, I did a version of this at a talk down in Texas a little while ago, and one of my former research mentors from Wisconsin was in the audience. And afterwards he came up and he said, every time you open your mouth, I think you're so full of crap, it's unbelievable. And then he said, oh, but then damn it, you get me thinking. You know, it's really not that different from what we do in our day-to-day lives in the research and scholarly areas that we do. We go into these areas where there's a degree of controversy. We stake out a claim. I am more than happy to defend anything that I say here, but I'm also really eager to have that, you know, kind of conversation. If there's things I don't understand, I cannot pretend to understand everything. I heard a really wonderful talk by somebody once who said, the way I define a person as being a really critical thinker is a person who changed their mind about something important once a day. Because the alternative is that you think you're right about everything. In that case, you're just an idiot. So I'm really happy to engage in the debate and going someplace and sort of putting that out there is sort of the rationale I have for it. So I really don't have, you know, I really think I mean, maybe I'm just a silly 15th century academic, but I think this is what universities are about.
So you're just counting to say, okay, now that you've done this, yeah, we can't get rid of it because you've got tenure. But the students, do they have meet some sort of outcome standard, or that just doesn't become an issue? They progress through the curriculum, and so they've demonstrated their competency in some other area.
So I am a believer in research, right? What we have created, I mean, in terms of looking at student outcomes, we have created a mechanism by which people can collect meaningful data about student learning. I'm not just left to questionnaire choices and so forth. I can sit down and say, at some periodic rate, I can't do it every semester, it's hard work, but at some periodic rate we can go in and sample and begin to say, what does learning really appear to be here? We have publications on this, but and we're not the only ones who do that. Trying to do it as a department has been one of the great benefits of this new program. I cannot say that we've done it systematically as a department ever, except we're starting it now. We've committed ourselves over the next 5-year period to look at every course, every faculty member, and all the testing, and really try to, and we're trying to do this very simply. How do we teach it? How do students learn it? How do we test it? And to try to get a sense of whether or not there's even alignment between that. So let me give you a simple survey we're doing now. I mean, it's not a survey, it's focus groups that we're doing. What are the resources that the students use in your class? It's a longer list than you would imagine. And so as an educator, as a person who's teaching a particular class, doesn't it seem reasonable that I at least ought to be aware of the things that students are using? Then, of course, the second generation question, how are they using them? And isn't it part of my responsibility in the design of the learning environment to think about providing guidance for those things as well? I think there has been an enormous error. We have borrowed many of the flipped classroom strategies, even the clicker strategies. Many of these strategies have been derived from the secondary education environment. And a big difference between the K-12 sector and the university sector in terms of education is in the K-12 sector, I'll overgeneralize this, in the K-12 section, the classroom is the space. It is the place where you expect to see the greatest amount of action and learning and concentration of stuff taking place. You know, at the university level, that's not true. The interaction with me in the classroom is a fraction of what the students do. And sort of turning everything over and changing that 50-minute or 80-minute period to conform to the idea that that's the only place students are learning, I think that's a mistake. I think it's an honest and a real error. And I'm trying to take that and invert that out and say, what are all the things that students are doing to contribute to their learning? And first inventory that, and then look at how they're learning it. But the simple inventory, right? This has been actually alarmingly interesting for my colleagues. Because we'll interview them and say, what do you think the students are doing to learn in your class? Then we go to the students in that class. What are you doing to learn in that class? It's just a huge difference, and that's really interesting. Then the question of how they're learning it and what's effective. Is there a subset that's good? We've done some really interesting research on this. I won't belabor all the details of it. We find in the organic chemistry class that there's about 16 resources that the students mainly use. And what we find is for students to be successful in that class, I'm going to define success as starting high and ending high, for example, right? That would be a measure of that by the first exam, they need to have found about 6 or 7 of those resources that work well for them. And the difference between that subset of students and the subset of students who starts low and stay low is about 3 to 4 resources. It's unbelievable. The correlation is unbelievable. The killer is that if you're a student in that bottom group, what is the only thing you want to know? What are they? Right? I want to be like you. What are they? So here's a math problem for you. 16 resources taken 7 at a time. How many permutations are there? 3.5 million. Turns out there's no multivariate analysis we can do to kind of get down to that subset. It really appears to be an example of self-regulated learning, where in fact you have to find the 7 things that are good for you, and you have to learn to not listen, or to listen critically, because it could very well be that it's a completely different set for you. That's what we're finding. And we've had these great arguments on campus. This is one topic that's gone out into other disciplines. So one of my, actually, Tim McKay in physics. Did you interact with Tim? Tim's wonderful. Because Tim will engage in this kind of conversation. And he says, no, if you finally slice this pie enough, you'll start to get convergence on the use of the resources. I said, okay, let's try that. So after the second exam, I want only the people, out of 1,600 people, I want only the people who have scored 120, 119, or 118 out of 120 on the second exam, and look back and so forth. So out of about 1,600 people, there's about 35 people we're talking about. Now these people are freakishly good learners. They're better than me. They're better than me in my own exams. I don't score that well when I write the answer key. They're freakishly good. And so we went to them and said, so tell me about your resources. Tell me about the ones you're using. No convergence whatsoever. The basic histogram diagram of their use of resources maps right onto the class as a whole. The book is great. The book is a doorstop. There's no convergence there. But then when you ask them, how are you using them? Then when you ask them, in fact, we didn't ask them how you're using them. That's too complicated a problem. So the question we asked them was more interesting. What do you think your colleagues are doing wrong? You're doing well. What do you think your peers are doing wrong? Now they converged. Number one, my peers mistake understanding a correct answer with having solved the problem. It's really insightful. Right? This is why we keep the answer keys away from the little buggers, because they'll misuse them. And it turns out there's terrific psychological research here about the use and availability of authoritative answers. Students who have access and use authoritative answers enter into a psychological state of self-deception. And the self-deception they have is one of confidence. This is why they feel good when they look at the answer and go, I understand that. Well, how many times have you given a problem on your exam where you gave the answer and said you agree with it? They've trained themselves for something stupid. You pull that away. What else do the freakish learners do, right? So one is the mistake in the answers. The second is that, of course, I can't hide the answers. I can do my best, but I can't get them out of the network. So students can poke around to old exam files and all this kind of crap and get there. The knowledge of the availability of answers is a distraction. They will not engage deeply enough before resorting to the answer key. Well, you know that. So on my computer, on my phone, I have a game of Scrabble. I love Scrabble. Scrabble on my phone allows me only 4 hints. Scrabble on my computer allows me infinite hints. Which one do I like playing more? Because when I play there, I give up too easy. But when I know I only have 4 hints, I play very differently. The knowledge of the existence of the authoritative answer is a distraction for my engagement. And that's true for students. Third one out of 3. Third one out of 3. My peers forgive themselves too easily for small errors. Whereas when I make a small error, I see it as the tip of the iceberg. And it bugs me. Right? So here they converge. They converge on the behaviors. Now these are terrific learning behaviors. But the resources are just media. They're just vehicles that they use to try to get there. But the convergence is in these really interesting behaviors for learning. And so looking at this is where we're looking in terms of trying to understand the nature of our success and the nature of our effect in our students. Wow.
All right, we're excited to have an afternoon of showcases. The first session will be starting in a few minutes. Again, all the details are in the program. And thank you so much for joining us for this lunch.